My name is Beverly, 28 years old, and I never thought my fairy tale wedding would turn into a public humiliation. There I was, in my dream gown, watching my fiancé Leonard confess his affair with my maid of honor. I fled to my Aunt Marilyn's village that night, mascara streaked down my face. But instead of welcoming me into her cozy home, she handed me keys to her abandoned bakery downtown. I had no idea that dusty old building would become my salvation. If you're watching this right now, drop a comment letting me know where you're tuning in from. Hit that like and subscribe button, and stick around to see how I turned the worst day of my life into something unexpected. I had spent 15 months planning the perfect wedding. As an event planner by profession, I approached my own wedding with the same meticulous attention to detail that I gave to my clients. Every flower arrangement, every place setting, every musical selection had been carefully chosen to create the perfect atmosphere for what should have been the happiest day of my life. Leonard and I had been together for 5 years. We met at the marketing firm where we both worked me in event coordination and him in account management. It wasn't love at first sight or anything dramatic like that. Our relationship grew naturally from friendship to something deeper. He proposed on our 4th anniversary with a vintage ring that had belonged to his grandmother. I cried when he got down on one knee at the botanical gardens where we had our 3rd date. Everything seemed so perfect, so right. The morning of the wedding dawned bright and clear, exactly the weather I had hoped for. My bridesmaids arrived early at the hotel suite, champagne flowing as we got our hair and makeup done. Karen, my maid of honor and best friend since college, seemed oddly distracted, checking her phone constantly and disappearing for what she claimed were bathroom breaks that lasted too long. I chalked it up to wedding day stress. "You look absolutely beautiful," my mother Gladys gushed as she helped me into my dress, an off-shoulder lace gown with a cathedral train that I had fallen in love with the moment I tried it on. I was floating on air as my father Norman took my arm at the back of the church. "Ready to become Mrs. Crawford?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. But as we began our walk down the aisle, I noticed Leonard looked uncomfortable, shifting his weight from foot to foot, his face pale. Our eyes met, and instead of the love and excitement I expected to see, there was guilt, and something else I couldn't quite identify. When we reached the altar, Leonard took my hands in his, but they were cold and clammy. Before the minister could even begin, Leonard cleared his throat. "I can't do this," he said, his voice echoing in the suddenly silent church. My heart stopped. "What do you mean?" I whispered, hoping desperately that this was some kind of bizarre joke. "I'm so sorry, Beverly," he said loud enough for the front rows to hear. "I've been seeing Karen. It's been going on for 6 months. She's pregnant." The collective gasp from our 200 guests was like a physical blow. I turned to look at Karen standing just behind me in her burgundy bridesmaid dress, her hand protectively over her still flat stomach, tears streaming down her face. "It just happened," she said weakly. "We didn't mean to hurt you." I couldn't breathe. The church was spinning. 5 years of my life, 15 months of planning, all crumbling around me in the most public, humiliating way possible. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, our families, our friends, my clients, all witnessing my complete humiliation. I don't remember much about the next few minutes. My father's arm around me guiding me back down the aisle. My mother collecting my things from the bridal suite. The painful drive home still in my wedding dress, the white satin now feeling like a costume in some cruel joke. Back at my apartment, I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my wedding dress, unable to process what had happened. My parents hovered nearby, unsure what to say or do. "You can stay with us as long as you need." My mother offered, her own eyes red from crying. But I couldn't bear the thought of staying in the same city running into people who had witnessed my humiliation, fielding calls and texts from well-meaning friends. The thought of potentially seeing Leonard and Karen together, watching her pregnancy progress, was unbearable. "I need to leave," I said, finally standing up and reaching for the zipper of my dress. "I can't stay here." My parents exchanged worried glances but didn't argue. They knew me well enough to recognize my determined tone. That night, as they went back to their house to cancel honeymoon arrangements and deal with questions from family, I began packing. Each item I put in my suitcase was a sharp reminder of the life I thought I would be living. The honeymoon lingerie still with tags attached, the just married passport cover, the books about Italy I had bought for our honeymoon. The next morning, I began the painful process of returning wedding gifts, writing brief notes explaining the situation. Each package I prepared felt like another small humiliation. By evening, I had made my decision. I would go to Millfield, the small village where my Aunt Marilyn lived. I had spent summers there as a child, and the peaceful setting was exactly what I needed now. I left a note for my parents promising to call when I arrived, packed my car, and drove away from the life that had fallen apart before it could even begin. The drive to Millfield took 6 hours, giving me plenty of time to cycle through shock, grief, rage, and back again. I drove with the windows down, the wind whipping my hair, trying to blow away the memory of standing abandoned at the altar. The radio stayed off. I couldn't bear to hear any love songs or wedding dedications. My memories of Millfield were like faded postcards in my mind, snapshots of idyllic childhood summers spent helping in Aunt Marilyn's bakery, swimming in the lake, reading under the willow tree in her backyard. Aunt Marilyn was my mother's older sister, a never-married woman who had carved out an independent life for herself. As a child, I had found her fascinating and a bit mysterious. As I drove into town, I was struck by how little had changed. The same gazebo stood in the town square, the same row of shops lined Main Street, though some names had changed. I drove slowly past Marilyn's bakery, which had been closed for about 10 years now, after Aunt Marilyn had decided to retire from the business. The windows were dusty, the blue and white awning faded. It gave me a pang to see it so neglected after the vibrant place it had been in my childhood. I pulled up to Aunt Marilyn's cottage on Maple Street, a charming 2-bedroom house with a wraparound porch and flower boxes bursting with geraniums. Taking a deep breath, I got out of the car and walked up to the door. I hadn't called ahead. I wasn't thinking clearly enough for that kind of planning. I knocked, and a moment later, Aunt Marilyn opened the door. At 62, she was still striking her silver hair, cut in a stylish bob, her posture erect. Her eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Beverly, what on earth?" "Hi, Aunt Marilyn," I said, my voice cracking. I need a place to stay for a while." Her expression softened as she took in my disheveled appearance, the dark circles under my eyes. "Your mother called yesterday. The wedding." I nodded, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. Come in," she said, stepping back to let me enter. I followed her into the familiar living room with its comfortable furniture and walls lined with bookshelves. She gestured for me to sit on the sofa while she went to make tea, a ritual I remembered from childhood visits. When things were difficult or emotional, Aunt Marilyn made tea. When she returned with 2 steaming mugs, she sat beside me. "Tell me everything," she said simply. And so I did. The whole humiliating story poured out of me, punctuated by fresh tears. Aunt Marilyn listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or touching my hand in sympathy. "You did the right thing coming here," she said when I had finished. "You need space to heal." Relief washed over me. "Thank you. I won't be a bother, I promise. I just need some time away from everything." Aunt Marilyn set down her mug and fixed me with a direct look. "You can stay in Millfield as long as you need," she said, "but not here in this house." I blinked in confusion. "What?" "But I thought—" "I'm going to give you the keys to the bakery," she continued. "The apartment upstairs is furnished, though it will need a good cleaning. The building has been sitting empty for too long." "The bakery," I repeated, stunned. "But I came here to escape to hide out for a while. I don't want to run a bakery." "Who said anything about running it?" Aunt Marilyn replied. "Though the equipment is all still there." She stood and went to a drawer in the sideboard, returning with a set of keys. "You need to rebuild your life, Beverly, not hide from it. That old bakery has good bones. So do you." I took the keys mechanically, too shocked to argue. This wasn't at all what I had expected. I had imagined curling up in Aunt Marilyn's guest room, being coddled and comforted, not being sent to an abandoned building. "But why can't I stay here with you?" I asked, hating how childish I sounded. "Because you need your own space to fall apart and put yourself back together," she said firmly. "You need a project, not a nursemaid." An hour later, I stood in the middle of the dusty, forgotten bakery luggage at my feet, feeling more alone than ever. The space was surprisingly large, with the storefront area in front, the kitchen in back, and stairs leading to the apartment above. I climbed the stairs slowly, each step creaking under my weight. The apartment was small, but had everything I needed: a bedroom, bathroom, living area, and tiny kitchen. Everything was covered in a thick layer of dust, the furniture draped with sheets that had once been white but were now a dingy gray. I pulled off one sheet to reveal a worn but sturdy sofa. Another uncovered a small dining table with 2 chairs. The bedroom held a double bed with a brass frame, a dresser, and a nightstand. The kitchen had basic appliances that looked like they were from the 1990s, but when I tested the faucet, water ran clear after a few sputters. I opened the windows to let in fresh air, sending dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sunlight. Then I sat on the edge of the bed and gave in to the tears that had been threatening all day. I cried for my lost relationship, for the public humiliation, for the future I had planned that would never come to be. I cried until my throat was raw and my eyes were swollen, until there seemed to be no tears left. As darkness fell, I made up the bed with sheets I found in the linen closet, took a lukewarm shower in the bathroom with its avocado green fixtures, and fell into an exhausted sleep in this strange place that was now apparently my home. I woke to sunlight streaming through windows I hadn't managed to cover the night before, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. For one blessed moment, I didn't remember why I was there. Then it all came rushing back: the wedding, the humiliation, the escape. With a groan, I pulled myself out of bed and went to the bathroom to splash water on my face. The mirror reflected a stranger, hollow-eyed and pale. I looked away quickly. After a breakfast of granola bars I had in my purse, I decided to explore the bakery more thoroughly in daylight. The dust was even more apparent now, coating every surface. Downstairs, the bakery kitchen was like a time capsule. Industrial mixers, proofing cabinets, cooling racks, and ovens that had once produced the best baked goods in 3 counties, now silent and forgotten. I opened cabinets to find baking pans, measuring cups, and utensils still neatly organized, waiting for hands to put them to use again. In a drawer, I found a stack of handwritten recipe cards in Aunt Marilyn's precise script, the corners worn from years of handling. The front of the shop still had display cases now empty of the pastries and breads that once filled them, and small cafe tables where customers had enjoyed their treats with coffee. The blue and white checked curtains were faded but intact, and the chalkboard menu still had ghostly outlines of the last offerings written there a decade ago. There was something both sad and comforting about the space, like an elderly relative who had once been vibrant and was now merely waiting for the end. I felt a strange kinship with the abandoned bakery. A knock at the front door startled me. Through the dusty glass, I could see a middle-aged man peering in curiously. I hesitated, then went to unlock the door. "Thought I saw someone moving around in here," he said when I opened the door a crack. "Harold Jenkins. I own the hardware store next door." He gestured to the building to the right. You must be Marilyn's niece. Word travels fast in Millfield. Beverly, I said reluctantly, extending my hand. Just visiting for a while. Harold's handshake was firm, his smile genuine. Well, welcome to Millfield. Any plans for the old bakery folks around here have missed Marilyn's cinnamon rolls something fierce. No plans, I said quickly. Just staying in the apartment upstairs temporarily. Shame, Harold said, looking past me at the dusty interior. This place used to be the heart of downtown. Let me know if you need any hardware supplies for fixing it up. I can give you the family discount. Thanks, but I'm not really here to renovate, I replied, eager to end the conversation. Well, offer stands, he said amiably. Stop by the store if you need anything. As he walked away, I realized I would need cleaning supplies at the very least. The apartment was too dusty to live in comfortably. With a sigh, I grabbed my purse and headed out, locking the bakery behind me. Main Street was quiet on this weekday morning, just a few people going about their business. I felt their curious gazes as I walked to the general store at the end of the block. Inside, I quickly gathered cleaning supplies, trying to avoid conversation. You must be Beverly, said the older woman at the checkout. Her name tag identified her as Judy. Marilyn's niece staying at the old bakery. I managed a tight smile. News travels fast. Small town? Judy shrugged. We heard about your situation. Such a shame about your wedding. My cheeks burned. Of course Aunt Marilyn would have told people. I'd rather not discuss it, I said stiffly. Judy nodded understandingly. Of course, dear. Just know that Millfield is a good place to heal. We look after our own here. I wasn't sure if I qualified as their own after a decade away, but I thanked her and hurried back to the bakery, avoiding eye contact with anyone I passed. Back in the apartment, I plugged in my phone, which had died during the night. As soon as it powered up, it began buzzing with notifications. 12 missed calls from my parents, 8 from friends, and numerous text messages. There were also social media notifications that I couldn't bring myself to look at, knowing they would be filled with pitying comments and possibly photos from the aborted wedding. I called my parents first, assuring them I was safe, and settled at Aunt Marilyn's, though I didn't specify I was actually in her abandoned bakery. They were worried but relieved to hear from me, promising to give me the space I needed while handling things back home. Leonard came by yesterday, my mother said hesitantly. He wanted to apologize, to explain. I don't want his explanations, I said firmly. Please don't tell him where I am. After promising to call again soon, I hung up and started the daunting task of cleaning the apartment. Physical labor was a relief, giving me something to focus on besides my shattered life. I scrubbed and swept and mopped until sweat dripped down my back and my arms ached. By evening, the apartment was livable, if not homey. As I sat on the now clean sofa, eating a sandwich from the general store, I scrolled through my phone reluctantly. There were sympathetic messages from friends which I answered briefly. Then I made the mistake of checking social media. Photos from the wedding preparation were everywhere, tagged with pitying comments. Worse, I found that Leonard had already changed his relationship status and posted a sonogram picture announcing his impending fatherhood with Karen. They had moved into the house we had bought together, the one I had spent months decorating in anticipation of our married life. I threw my phone across the room, where it bounced harmlessly on a chair. Then I curled up on the sofa and cried myself to sleep for the second night in a row. 2 weeks into my stay at the bakery, I had established a routine of sorts. I spent my days cleaning the bakery itself, more to keep busy than with any real purpose. The kitchen gleamed now, all equipment wiped free of dust floors, mopped surfaces sanitized. I had no intention of using any of it, but the methodical cleaning gave my days structure, and physical exhaustion helped me sleep at night. I was still avoiding most human contact, nodding politely to Harold when I saw him opening his hardware store in the mornings, but declining his invitations to join him for coffee. I shopped for groceries in the next town over to avoid the curious stares and whispered conversations that followed me in Millfield. My parents called daily, their worry evident. Friends texted less frequently, now their own lives continuing, while mine remained in suspended animation. I had blocked Leonard and Karen on all platforms after seeing another sonogram picture, this one revealing they were having a boy. One night, unable to sleep despite my physical exhaustion, I found myself wandering downstairs to the bakery kitchen. The industrial refrigerator hummed softly in the darkness. I turned on a single light and stood in the center of the kitchen, surrounded by the tools of a trade I knew little about, despite my childhood summers helping Aunt Marilyn. On impulse, I pulled out one of the recipe cards I had found. Basic white bread. The card read, followed by a list of simple ingredients and instructions in Aunt Marilyn's neat handwriting. I checked the pantry and found to my surprise that the basic ingredients were still there in sealed containers. Flour, sugar, salt, yeast. I measured and mixed as the recipe directed, surprised at how easily it came back to me. The feel of flour between my fingers, the scent of yeast blooming in warm water. These sensations transported me back to those childhood summers. There was something soothing about the process, the way the dough came together under my hands, at first sticky and unwieldy, then smooth and elastic as I kneaded it on the floured countertop. I worked the dough longer than necessary, finding a strange catharsis in the repetitive motion, pushing all my hurt and anger into the innocent mound of dough. When I finally shaped it into a loaf and set it to rise, I felt a curious sense of accomplishment, the first positive emotion I had experienced in weeks. The heavenly smell of baking bread filled the apartment as I dozed on the sofa, waking me just before the timer went off. I pulled a perfectly golden loaf from the oven and set it on the counter to cool, admiring my handiwork. When I finally cut into it, the crumb was perfect, the texture light, yet substantial. I ate 3 slices standing at the counter, each bite a small comfort. It was almost dawn by the time I went back to bed, but I slept better than I had since arriving in Millfield. The next morning, I baked another loaf and then another. Each one came out perfect, as if my hands remembered what my mind had forgotten. On impulse, I walked down to the diner where I had seen Judy working and brought her a still warm loaf wrapped in a clean kitchen towel. "Just to say thank you for being kind my first day here," I said awkwardly as I placed it on the counter. Judy unwrapped it and inhaled deeply. "Lord have mercy, this smells just like Marilyn's bread. Did you bake this yourself?" I nodded, oddly pleased by her reaction. "Would you consider baking for the diner?" she asked suddenly. "Our supplier's bread is like cardboard compared to this. I'd pay you fair market rate." "Oh, I don't know." I hesitated. "I'm not a professional baker." "Could have fooled me," Judy said, breaking off a piece and tasting it. That's the real deal. Just think about it, okay? We'd start small, maybe a dozen loaves a day for our sandwiches and toast." I left the diner with a promise to consider it surprised to find myself actually tempted by the offer. It would give me something productive to do, a reason to get up in the morning, beyond just existing. That afternoon, I found myself at the general store buying more baking supplies. The owner, Samuel, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, helped me find everything on my list. "Heard you might be baking for Judy's diner," he said as he rang up my purchases. "Any chance you'd consider supplying my store too? We haven't had a decent bakery selection since your aunt closed shop." Word really did travel fast in Millfield. "I'm just experimenting right now," I said cautiously. "I don't know if I'm ready to supply businesses." Samuel nodded understandingly. "No pressure, but if you change your mind, there's definitely a market for good baked goods in town." Back at the bakery, I spent the afternoon making test batches of different breads, finding a strange peace in the rhythmic process of mixing, kneading, shaping, and baking. The physical work kept my hands busy while allowing my mind to wander, processing the trauma of the wedding in small, manageable pieces. The next day, I delivered my first official batch of bread to Judy's diner, 6 loaves of white and 6 of whole wheat. The cash she handed me was the first money I had earned since leaving my job back home. "There's a birthday party for Ella Jenkins on Saturday," Judy mentioned as I was leaving. "Harold's daughter. She's turning 8. They still need a cake if you're interested." "I've never made a proper birthday cake," I admitted. "Bet you could figure it out," Judy said with a wink. "Harold's a good man raising that child on his own since his wife passed. They deserve something special." I found myself agreeing before I could overthink it. Back at the bakery, I dug through Aunt Marilyn's recipe cards until I found one for yellow cake with chocolate frosting. I spent the rest of the day practicing producing 2 test cakes that were decent but not spectacular. The third attempt, with some adjustments to the recipe, was perfect. On Saturday morning, I delivered a 2-layer yellow cake with chocolate frosting and rainbow sprinkles to Harold's house, a small bungalow a few blocks from the bakery. The look of relief and gratitude on his face when he opened the door made something warm unfurl in my chest. "You're a lifesaver," he said, taking the cake carefully. "The bakery in Riverdale lost our order, and I was about to serve grocery store cupcakes to 20 kids. "It's nothing fancy," I said, suddenly self-conscious about my amateur decorating skills. "It's perfect," Harold assured me. "How much do I owe you?" I named a figure that seemed reasonable, and he insisted on adding a generous tip. As I turned to leave, a small voice called from inside the house. "Is that the cake lady, Daddy?" A little girl with Harold's kind eyes and a missing front tooth appeared at his side, looking at me with undisguised curiosity. "This is Miss Beverly," Harold said. "She made your birthday cake." "Thank you, Miss Beverly," Ella said politely. "Can I see it?" Harold carefully lifted the lid of the cake box, and Ella's eyes widened with delight. "It's beautiful," she gasped. "Just what I wanted." Her unfiltered joy was infectious, and I found myself smiling genuinely for the first time in weeks. "Happy birthday, Ella," I said. On the walk back to the bakery, I realized that I had gone nearly an hour without thinking about Leonard or the wedding. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. The next day, I received 3 more cake orders from parents who had been at Ella's party. And the day after that, Samuel from the general store asked again if I would consider supplying his store with daily bread and pastries. This time, I said yes. Almost without realizing it, I had started down a new path, 1 loaf of bread at a time. 1 month after arriving in Millfield, I had established a new routine. I woke at 4:30 each morning to begin baking, producing dozens of loaves, rolls, and pastries for Judy's diner, Samuel's general store, and an increasing number of individual customers who had heard about the niece who bakes like Marilyn. The physical demands of baking were exhausting, but satisfying. My body was changing, my arms stronger from kneading dough, my posture more confident. The dark circles under my eyes had faded, and my complexion had improved from the steam of the ovens and the healthy sweat of honest work. I had started experimenting with Aunt Marilyn's recipes, adding my own touches. My cinnamon rolls had become something of a local sensation, with people lining up at Samuel's store on the days he carried them. I had developed a sourdough starter that produced a tangy, complex bread, unlike anything available in the chain stores in neighboring towns. One afternoon, as I was cleaning up after a day of baking, Harold stopped by with a toolbox. "Noticed your front door sticking," he said casually. "Thought I might fix it for you." "You don't have to do that," I said, though the door had indeed been troublesome. "Neighborly thing to do," he replied with a shrug. "Besides, Ella would never forgive me if I didn't help her favorite cake baker." I had made several more cakes for various children's birthdays in town, and apparently earned a reputation among the under-10 crowd. The thought made me smile, As Harold worked on the door, he mentioned casually, "You know this storefront could be something again with a little work. The bones are good." I looked around at the dusty display cases and faded walls. I had been so focused on the kitchen that I had neglected the actual shop area. "I'm not really planning to stay long term," I said, though the words lacked conviction. Harold nodded, not pushing the point. "Well, if you change your mind, Bruce over at Millfield Construction could help with the renovations. He did a nice job on the bookstore last year." After he left, I stood in the empty storefront trying to see it through fresh eyes. The space had potential with its large windows and central location. For the first time, I allowed myself to consider the possibility of actually reopening the bakery, of making this temporary refuge into something permanent. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. I had come to Millfield to hide, to lick my wounds in private. But somewhere along the way, I had started to heal, to build something new from the ashes of my old life. That evening, I was startled by a notification on my phone, which I had been checking less and less frequently. It was a message from Leonard. My finger hovered over the delete button, but curiosity won out. "Beverly, I know you probably hate me, and you have every right to. What I did was unforgivable. I just want you to know how sorry I am for the way things happened. You deserved better. I hope you're finding some peace wherever you are. Leonard." 6 weeks ago, this message would have sent me into a tailspin of grief and anger. Now I felt a curious detachment as I read it. The pain was still there, but duller, more distant. Without responding, I deleted the message and blocked his number. Later that week, scrolling through social media for the first time in days, I saw photos from Karen's baby shower. She was visibly pregnant now, glowing in a blue dress, surrounded by friends, some of whom had been my bridesmaids. They had decorated the living room of what should have been my house with blue balloons and "It's a Boy" banners. I waited for the familiar stab of pain, the sense of betrayal. It came, but muted, like an old injury that aches when rain is coming, but no longer demands constant attention. I closed the app and went downstairs to the kitchen, where I spent the evening developing a new recipe for chocolate babka, losing myself in the creative process. The next day, I called Bruce from Millfield Construction and asked him to come give me an estimate on renovating the storefront. It was time to stop pretending this was temporary, to commit to the new life I was building one day at a time. Bruce was a burly man in his 40s with a thoughtful approach to the space. "We could restore the original tin ceiling," he suggested, pointing upward where acoustic tiles had been installed decades ago. "And these floors would look amazing refinished. They don't make hardwood like this anymore." His enthusiasm was infectious, and I found myself sharing ideas I didn't even know I had. A modern display case, but with vintage styling to honor the bakery's history. A small seating area where people could enjoy their treats. A fresh coat of paint in a warm butter yellow. "We could have you ready for a grand reopening in 3 weeks, Bruce said as he wrote up the estimate. "If that's what you're thinking." "Yes," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my decision. "That's exactly what I'm thinking." Over the next few weeks, the bakery underwent a transformation. Bruce and his crew worked during the afternoons and evenings after I had finished my baking for the day. They uncovered the original pressed tin ceiling, refinished the hardwood floors to a warm honey glow, and installed new lighting that made the space feel both modern and timeless. I painted the walls myself, finding satisfaction in the physical labor and the visible progress. Harold helped me restore the antique bakery sign that had been stored in the basement, the blue and white paint chipped, but the Maryland's Bakery lettering still legible. "What are you going to call it?" Harold asked as we hung the refurbished sign. "Still Maryland's." I paused, considering. "I think Beverly's Bakery at Maryland's Place, to honor the history but make it my own." Harold nodded approvingly. Has a nice ring to it. My parents came for a brief visit during the renovation, their concern evident as they pulled up in front of the bakery. "Oh, sweetheart," my mother said when she saw me, her eyes filling with tears. But the tears were unnecessary. I was not the broken woman who had fled her failed wedding. I was Tanner Stronger, my hair pulled back in a practical ponytail flower dusting my apron. "I'm okay, Mom," I said, hugging her tightly. "Really?" They stayed for 2 days sleeping in the now comfortably furnished apartment upstairs. I showed them my daily routine, the recipes I had developed, the renovation plans. They exchanged glances I couldn't quite interpret. "What?" I asked over dinner the second night. "We're just surprised," my father said carefully. "When you left, we thought you were running away, but it seems like you were running towards something instead." "I didn't know it at the time," I admitted. "But yes, I think I was." The morning of the grand reopening arrived sunny and mild, perfect weather for the small outdoor seating area Harold had helped me set up on the sidewalk. I had been baking since midnight, producing an array of breads, pastries, and cakes to fill the new display cases. At 6 a.m., I unlocked the front door to find a small crowd already waiting. Judy from the diner was first in line, followed by Samuel from the general store, Harold and Ella, and at least 24 other Millfield residents I had come to know over the past 3 months. "Welcome to Beverly's Bakery at Maryland's Place," I said, my voice wavering slightly with emotion. "Come on in." The day passed in a blur of transactions, congratulations, and the simple joy of watching people enjoy food I had created with my own hands. By closing time at 4 p.m., the display cases were nearly empty, and my cash register was full. As I was wiping down the counter preparing to close, Harold stopped by with a bunch of sunflowers. "Congratulations," he said, handing me the bouquet. "You've brought something special back to Millfield." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by the gesture. "For the flowers and for everything else. Your help, your encouragement." "Would you maybe like to get dinner sometime?" he asked, a touch of nervousness in his voice. "Not as neighbors or business associates, but as a date." I hesitated only briefly. 6 months ago, I had thought I knew exactly what my life would look like. Now I was open to possibilities I had never imagined. "I'd like that," I said. Harold's smile was worth any lingering uncertainty. "Great. Friday, I'll see if my sister can watch Ella." After he left, I locked up the shop, flipped the sign to closed, and went upstairs to my apartment bone-tired but deeply satisfied in a way I hadn't felt in years, even before the wedding disaster. I had come to Millfield broken and humiliated, seeking only a place to hide. Instead, I had found a new purpose, a new community, and perhaps the beginnings of a new love story, one that would unfold at its own pace, with no rushed timelines or elaborate plans. As I soaked my aching feet in a warm bath that night, I scrolled through my phone to find a blog post about the bakery written by a food writer who had happened to be passing through Millfield that day. The post had already been shared dozens of times with comments from people promising to make the detour to try my baked goods. For the first time since my wedding day, I found myself looking forward to the future with genuine anticipation rather than dread. Whatever came next, I would face it with flour-dusted hands and a heart that was stronger for having been broken. At the 6-month mark of my stay in Millfield, Beverly's Bakery at Maryland's Place had become a thriving business. I had hired Gloria, a local teenager, to help with the front counter after school, and on weekends allowing me to focus more on the baking itself. The bakery had been featured in a regional magazine, bringing customers from as far as 50 miles away to try my signature cinnamon rolls and sourdough bread. My friendship with Alice, who owned the bookstore down the street, had deepened into a genuine bond. We often closed our shops at the same time and shared a pot of tea discussing books business, and occasionally my slowly healing heart. You know what I just realized? Alice said one evening as we sat in my apartment. You haven't mentioned Leonard in weeks. I considered this. I guess I haven't needed to. He feels like a character from someone else's story now. Alice smiled approvingly. That's progress. My relationship with Harold was developing slowly and sweetly. We had been on several dates, always arranged around his daughter Ella's schedule. He was considerate, never pushing for more than I was ready to give, understanding that my heart was still healing from its public breaking. Ella had become a regular fixture at the bakery, stopping by after school to do her homework at one of the small tables, occasionally helping Gloria with simple tasks. Her 8-year-old enthusiasm for everything was contagious, making it impossible to stay melancholy in her presence. I had just closed the shop for the day when my phone rang, displaying Aunt Marilyn's number. We spoke regularly, but usually on Sunday evenings. "Beverly, I'm coming back to Millfield tomorrow," she said without preamble. "I have some business to take care of." "That's wonderful," I replied, genuinely pleased. "I can't wait for you to see what I've done with the bakery." There was a pause. "Yes, about that. I should have mentioned this earlier, but I've been in talks with the developer about selling the bakery property." My stomach dropped. "Selling, but I'm running a business here now." "I know, dear, and I'm thrilled that you found something that makes you happy. But the reality is that building is my retirement fund. The developer wants to put in some kind of artisanal marketplace. They've made a very generous offer." I sat down heavily on a kitchen stool. "I see." I managed, though my mind was racing. Could I afford to buy the building myself? Where would I go if I had to leave back home to face Leonard and Karen and their new baby? The thought made me physically ill. "We'll talk when I arrive," Aunt Marilyn said, seeming to sense my distress. "I'm sure we can work something out." After we hung up, I sat in the silent bakery looking around at the space I had come to love. The gleaming display cases now empty after a busy day. The small tables where regulars lingered over coffee and pastries. The kitchen visible through an open archway where I had found healing through the simple act of creating food that brought people joy. The idea of losing it all was unbearable. That evening, I stress-baked 3 different types of bread and developed a new recipe for blackberry scones, working until well past midnight. The physical labor helped calm my racing thoughts, but the underlying anxiety remained. Aunt Marilyn was scheduled to arrive at noon the next day. I opened the bakery at 6 as usual, going through the motions of serving customers while my mind was elsewhere. Gloria noticed my distraction, but didn't comment, efficiently handling the register while I worked mechanically in the kitchen. At 11:30, I changed into clean clothes and waited nervously. When the bell over the door chimed at exactly noon, I looked up to see Aunt Marilyn standing there, elegant as always, in a navy pantsuit, her silver bob perfectly styled. The bakery was empty of customers for the moment, giving us privacy for our reunion. Aunt Marilyn looked around slowly, taking in the changes I had made to the space, her expression unreadable. "Aunt Marilyn," I said, coming around the counter to hug her. "It's so good to see you." She returned the hug warmly, then stepped back to continue her inspection of the bakery. "You've done an amazing job with the place," she said finally. "It looks even better than when I ran it." "Thank you," I said, relaxing slightly at the approval in her voice. "Would you like the full tour?" I showed her everything, the restored original features Bruce had uncovered during the renovation, the modern equipment I had added to the kitchen, the apartment upstairs, that I had transformed into a cozy home. As we walked, I told her about the regular customers, the special orders, the article in the regional magazine. "You've built something special here," Aunt Marilyn said as we sat at one of the small tables enjoying coffee and still warm pain au chocolat I had made that morning. "In such a short time, too." "I love it," I said simply. "This place saved me when I thought I was beyond saving." Aunt Marilyn nodded thoughtfully. And now you're worried I'm going to pull the rug out from under you by selling to the developers. Are you? I asked directly. Before she could answer, the bell over the door chimed again. I looked up, expecting to see a customer, and instead found myself staring at Leonard and a very pregnant Karen. My blood ran cold. Leonard looked as shocked to see me as I was to see him, while Karen had the grace to look uncomfortable. Beverly, Leonard said, his voice strained. We had no idea you were here. I stood up slowly, acutely aware of Aunt Marilyn watching the scene unfold. What are you doing in Millfield? I asked, proud of how steady my voice sounded. We're on a weekend getaway before the baby comes, Karen explained, one hand protectively over her enormous belly. Someone at our hotel recommended this bakery. We had no idea it was yours. It is, I said simply. Welcome to Beverly's Bakery at Marilyn's place. An awkward silence fell. Leonard looked around, taking in the charming space, the display cases filled with my creations, the small but steady stream of customers coming and going. You look good, he said finally. Really good. It was true, I realized. The physical work of baking had toned my body, given my skin a healthy glow. More than that, I carried myself differently now, with the quiet confidence of someone who had rebuilt her life on her own terms. Thank you, I said politely. Would you like to order something? The chocolate croissants are our specialty. The normalcy of the exchange seemed to unnerve Leonard more than anger would have. He had clearly expected tears or recriminations, not this calm, professional woman who was offering him pastries. Sure, he said uncertainly. 2 chocolate croissants and 2 coffees. I rang up their order efficiently, handed them their pastries, and directed them to the coffee station. As they took a table far from where Aunt Marilyn sat watching, I returned to my aunt. I'm impressed, she said quietly. 6 months ago, you would have fallen apart seeing them. 6 months ago, I was a different person, I replied. What happened with Leonard and Karen doesn't define me anymore. Aunt Marilyn smiled, a look of genuine pride on her face. No, it certainly doesn't. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a folder. I came here today planning to tell you about the developer's offer and give you first right of refusal if you wanted to buy the bakery yourself. My heart sank. There was no way I could match what a developer would pay. But watching you just now, Aunt Marilyn continued, and seeing what you've built here, I've made a decision. She slid the folder across the table to me. This is the deed to the bakery. I'm signing it over to you. I stared at her, certain I had misheard. What? You can't just give me a building. I can do whatever I want with my property, Aunt Marilyn said firmly. And I want you to have it. Consider it an investment in your future. But your retirement fund? I have other investments, she said dismissively. And watching you turn this forgotten space back into the heart of Millfield is worth more than money. I opened the folder with shaking hands to find the deed to 412 Main Street, with a transfer document already filled out, needing only my signature. I don't know what to say, I whispered, tears threatening. Say you'll keep making those chocolate croissants, Aunt Marilyn replied with a wink. They're even better than mine were. From across the bakery, I was aware of Leonard and Karen watching our exchange with curiosity. Let them wonder, I thought. Their chapter in my story was over. We signed the transfer documents right there at the table, Aunt Marilyn using Harold as a witness when he stopped by with Ella for their usual afternoon treat. When I told him what had happened, his face lit up with genuine happiness for me. This calls for a celebration, he declared. Dinner tonight at Lorenzo's my treat. You too, Marilyn, if you're free. I wouldn't miss it, Aunt Marilyn said warmly. After they left, I walked Aunt Marilyn to the door, still somewhat in shock from the unexpected gift. Why did you really send me to the bakery that first day? I asked suddenly. You could have let me stay with you, let me hide away, and lick my wounds. Aunt Marilyn considered the question. Because 30 years ago, I was left at the altar too, she said quietly. My fiancé ran off with my cousin. I came back to Millfield to hide to nurse my broken heart. My mother owned this bakery then, and she put me to work instead of letting me wallow. It saved me, gave me purpose, and eventually joy. I thought it might do the same for you. You never told me that story, I said, amazed by this new understanding of my independent, successful aunt. It stopped being the most interesting thing about me a long time ago, she replied with a small smile. Just as being left at the altar will stop being the most interesting thing about you. You're already so much more than that moment, Beverly. As she left, I turned back to my bakery, now truly mine in every sense. Leonard and Karen were gone, having slipped out while I was signing the documents. I felt a sense of closure, as if the universe had orchestrated this final meeting to show me how far I had come. The afternoon sun streamed through the front windows, illuminating the space I had rebuilt from neglect, just as I had rebuilt myself from heartbreak. Every morning, I woke before dawn to bake bread, to create something nourishing and beautiful from the simplest ingredients. There was a metaphor in that process that had become my salvation. I had come to Millfield 6 months ago, humiliated and broken, seeking only a place to hide from my pain. Instead, I had found a community, a purpose, the beginnings of a new love, and now, incredibly, a business of my own. As I tied my apron back on and prepared for the afternoon rush, I thought about the strange, winding path that had led me here. If Leonard hadn't humiliated me at the altar, if Aunt Marilyn hadn't refused to let me stay in her house, if I hadn't found comfort in the rhythmic process of baking bread in the middle of the night, none of this would have happened. Sometimes, our greatest heartbreaks lead us to our true selves if we're brave enough to follow the path through the pain. What about you? Has a moment that seemed like your worst disaster ever turned into something unexpectedly beautiful? Drop a comment below sharing your story of transformation. And if you enjoyed watching my journey from runaway bride to bakery owner, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories of resilience and reinvention. Share this video with someone who might need to be reminded that endings are often just surprising beginnings in disguise. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes life's greatest gifts come in the most unexpected packaging.